let's talk about this Jonathan Gruber thing, because and if there's any right-wingers who want to call in and tell me what the implications of this Jonathan Gruber tape mean to you, I'd be fascinated to hear from you. Maybe we should put out a little tweet. Here is, I think we hear audio of the Jonathan Gruber tape on this clip, and then we hear Angus King addressing the Fox and Friends people. But let's play the Jonathan Gruber tape, and then I'll get to the. So let's here's Angus King on Fox and Friends talking about Jonathan Gruber. Like I say, the guy who developed the broad strokes of the plans that both Edwards, Clinton, and Obama embraced in the 2008 election. Here it is. That ultimately became the Affordable Care Act.
In the Senate when they voted on Obamacare, and I wonder what you would have voted on then, especially after, and what you would vote on now after you hear this. One of the architects, Jonathan Gruber, was caught on camera saying this at the University of Pennsylvania, and I put in brackets, the stupidity of the American voter. Let's listen.
This bill was written in a tortured way to make sure CBO did not score the mandate as taxes. If CBO scored the mandate as taxes, the bill dies.
Pause
okay,
it.
so.
Okay, what he's saying right there is that the bill was written to call the mandate a penalty, not a tax, which ultimately the Supreme Court found actually, no, in reality, it's a tax. You can call it a penalty, but it's a tax. But it was called a penalty because politically, people who wrote it thought it would be smarter to call it a penalty than a tax. But everyone was aware that it was going to cost you if you did not get health insurance. In fact, most people thought you'd have to pay a direct payment as opposed to have it taken out of your taxes. But that's what he's referring to there. Continue.
It was written to do that. In terms of risk-rated subsidies, if you had a law which said healthy people are going to pay in, it made explicit that healthy people pay in and sick people get money, it would not have passed. Okay, just like the people, lack of transparency is a huge political advantage, and basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever. But basically, that was really, really critical to getting the thing to pass. And, it's the second best argument. Look, I wish Mark was right. We can make it all transparent, but I'd rather have this law than not. So it's kind of like his reporter story. Yeah, there's things I wish I could change, but I'd rather have this law than not.
So he's basically saying that he didn't.
Pause it. The risk-rated subsidies, that basically means that healthy people will be paying more. So if you're like one of those 25, and we had these arguments over and over again. If you're 25 years old, you're going to be paying a little bit more as a 25-year-old. But as a 50-year-old and or a 50-year-old who is sick, you're going to be paying less. That's what the risk-rated subsidies are. Now, I happen to think that the conversation about, I don't think anybody would necessarily, I think here we said that's a subsidy, right? The healthy person is subsidizing the sick person because ultimately that healthy person is going to get sick and old. So really they're subsidizing themselves in the future. In the political sphere, nobody talked like that. Because I don't know, people don't even understand that concept within insurance in general. You as a person who does not have a fire at your house are subsidizing all those people who do ultimately have a fire at their house. That's what insurance is. The idea of being an advisor and saying that the American public is stupid, well, you're a moron. Because video exists. But is the American public stupid when it comes to politics? Of course. And policy? Of course. And the lack of transparency he's talking about is just that these are sophisticated things that the American public doesn't digest, and they wouldn't allow half the things that exist could be demagogued away. So yes, I went to a 828 rally with Glenn Beck, and all the people there were talking about how there should be a law that you can't have laws that are bigger than 100 pages. And somebody told me, I said, why are you here? I'm here because the Constitution isn't being followed and there's not enough God in our government. And I said, well, the idea that we don't have God as a driving force in our government or religion is a function of the Constitution. And she said to me, well, to be honest, I haven't read the Constitution yet, but I am taking a course on it in October. And I said, what if you find when you take this course that the Constitution tells you you can't have religion as a driving force of government? She says, well, I don't know what I'm going to do then. So the lack of transparency that you would actually have to read the Constitution helped Glenn Beck in this situation. Now, you could say that's because the stupidity of that woman, or you could just simply say that she hadn't quite done her homework. That's a dynamic that goes on every day in politics. But the idea that this wasn't legislated transparently is a joke. This thing got more debate than just about every other thing that was ever passed in the history of the United States, as far as I could tell. I don't think that the people on either side of it, did anything but represented in their own best interests. But give me a break. They're going to hold hearings on this? It's just stunning.